Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Ryan Berg, and I'm the Director of the Americas Program at CSIS, as well as the Director of the Future of Venezuela initiative. Thank you for joining us today for a conversation with María Corina Machado, presidential candidate in the opposition's primary and a former member of the National Assembly of Venezuela. Before we formally begin, let's take care of logistics. This event will last approximately 60 minutes. Following the moderated portion of our discussion, we will field questions from the audience. Please submit questions by clicking on the Ask Live Questions link on the event webpage. Please note that a recording of this discussion will be made available on the event webpage following the end of today's event. When reading the headlines, it is difficult to find much cause for optimism in Venezuela today. The Maduro regime appears to be marching from diplomatic victory to diplomatic victory, as governments across the region and around the world move to normalize their relations, calculating that Maduro is unlikely to leave anytime soon. Most recently, Maduro was welcomed with open arms in Brazil, even as an investigation by the International Criminal Court into crimes against humanity continues to move forward. The Venezuelan economy remains shattered as millions of people remain in poverty while well-connected elites profit off illicit trade. Venezuelans continue to vote with their feet when possible and migrate in search of greater opportunities, freedoms, and security abroad. Corruption and insecurity remain endemic, as Maduro appears less concerned with providing citizen security and keen to ensure that the regime plays the role of kingmaker in Venezuela's vibrant criminal underworld. Amid this otherwise disheartening picture, much focus has been directed towards planned 2024 presidential elections, which carry the potential to pressure the regime and focus much-needed domestic and international attention on the situation in Venezuela. The challenge of campaigning under a dictatorship should not be underestimated. Nevertheless, the Venezuelan opposition and people have been innovative and tenacious in their fight to restore democracy. Millions in the country are placing their hopes in this process. To outline what is happening on the ground in Venezuela today, as well as describe what forms of support are most needed from the international community, we are truly honored this afternoon to host María Corina Machado. María Corina brings decades of experience defending and later campaigning for the restoration of Venezuela's democracy. In 2010, she was elected to the National Assembly as the highest vote-getter in the country. Machado subsequently played a leading role in the 2014 protest movement against the Maduro regime and has subsequently been a leading figure in opposition politics. Because of her activism, Machado has been subject to repeated and unfounded accusations by the regime. Nevertheless, she has been a tireless campaigner, and it is truly an honor to host her today. Ms. Machado, welcome. I also want to introduce my fellow moderator, Deputy Director and Senior Fellow in the Americas Program, Chris Hernandez-Roy. Chris has a long and storied history of working at the Organization for American States, where, among other things, he advised Secretary General Almagro and documented the Maduro regime's crimes against humanity. Chris, welcome. Before we begin our discussion today, we have a short video to present in order to provide our viewers with more context on the campaign in Venezuela, as well as the stakes in this election. María Corina, thanks so much for being here with us. We just had this video which provides a little bit more context on what's going on in the campaign as well as what is at stake in this election. You've been crisscrossing the country now for months, in engaging Venezuelans. Give us a sense of what the pulse of the Venezuelan electorate is in the 2024 process. In Washington, we're led to believe that apathy is high, but what has been your experience throughout this process?
Well, first of all, thank you very much to the CSIS American program, the guest program, and to you, Director Brandenburg, as well as our Deputy Director and Senior Fellow, Christopher Nandefoy, for this great opportunity. I'm very grateful. This is for me a unique chance to share my vision and our plans to move ahead into a transition to democracy in Venezuela. Look, what's been happening in Venezuela in the last 5 months is something amazing. If you see what Venezuela looked at the beginning of the year, it seemed a country that was hopeless, defeated, sad, tired, and day by day, week after week, we've been seeing a giant social movement starting to emerge. And I really want to tell you that I think it's surprising for many. I'm bringing good news today regarding the solution for the conflict in Arba. And I know for many people that have been, following closely all these years of fight, talking about Venezuela might seem tiresome, or some people have turned cynical because they've seen so many failures and treasons even. But I believe the situation in Venezuela is unique now in terms of the possibility of having a real opportunity for regime change, transition to democracy next year, because there are, as you know, in our program, in our schedule, there are presidential elections due to take place next year, specifically in December.
María Corina, in anticipation of the upcoming elections, currently scheduled, as we've said, for 2024, what reforms or commitments on the part of Maduro will be needed to improve the conditions so that these elections can take place? Are free and fair elections even a possibility? You have just said you have this feeling that there is a possibility for change. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more, given the very, very difficult conditions?
Well, first of all, we have to remember that there have been 33 elections during this period. And every single time conditions have been turning worse and worse, not improving. And certainly today there are no conditions. And we have to say there is no date, no conditions, and no incentives on the part of the government. Because they know they would lose. I mean, they would be defeated. So the whole point now is to understand that in order to have electoral integrity, and there are certain issues that I will mention that are, in our opinion, crucial, critical to achieve in order to have that competitiveness. But in order to do that, we have to change dramatically our relative position in terms of the strength to go into a real negotiation in which you can actually achieve these issues. And I will mention them very fast, please. In terms of electoral integrity, we need to have the possibility that every Venezuelan, home and abroad, that have the right to vote are allowed to do so. Second, we have to guarantee that there is one person, one vote. Third, we have to also be assured that there is the secrecy of the vote. Fourth, that there is free access to all media. And finally, that we have strong and continuous international observation. But as I say, those are things the regime will not give today unless we create a relative position of strength in which we can make them move into a real and serious negotiation process.
María Corina, you've brought up the topic of the negotiations, and so I want to ask you a question about the international pressure that's required to ensure, as you said, that a real negotiation process takes place. And I'll ask you a two-part question. The first is about the international community. The second is about Latin American leaders. Pressure, as we know, is one of the most important levers to extract electoral concessions from the regime. So the first part of the question is, what should policymakers here in D.C., where we're coming to you from, be doing to exert more effective pressure in the run-up to 2024? And the second part of the question is, what is your message to Latin American leaders who seem to want to normalize relations with Maduro, as we saw recently with President Lula in Brasilia?
Well, right, I'd say that to have a true and reasonable negotiation, first of all, we need to have strength on the side of the Venezuelan people. We need to have Venezuelan people committed and ready to organize and activate inside Venezuela. So in order to do that, we first need to have a credible and legitimate leadership. And that's where the primaries come into. We can talk about that later. Then, with a legitimate leadership that is recognized inside and abroad, then you can establish a relation with the international community in order to have the international community aligned with that strategy, which we have not today. So in terms of what then the international community can do, and we have, and starting with Washington and let's say the United States as a whole, first and foremost, I want to insist that you cannot normalize relationships with a tyrant, with a tyranny, with a rogue state. Those are terrible signals to the Venezuelan people and to the regime itself. Second, I think it has been done so far, and we have to maintain this as a bipartisan effort in which we see this as the whole U.S. nation understanding that solving the Venezuelan conflict is critical for their own interest, not only for Venezuelan people. Third, we need to maintain pressure, such as individual sanctions on individuals that have committed corruption, narco trafficking, human rights violations, and so on. We believe as well the humanitarian effort on behalf of the U.S. has led this effort, should be maintained and probably be more effectively applied, if I may. I also think that the Department of Justice should maintain its normal activities and unsealing the information about corruption and other crimes members of the regime have committed. And I think that reaching out to other countries and maintaining leadership vis-a-vis the European Union and other countries should be a priority. Regarding the rest of Latin America, I would address your question mostly on the side of those presidents that are supposedly ideologically close to Maduro. But I think they have realized that Maduro is toxic. Just see what happened last week in Brazil with this ambush Lula tried to put in place to other presidents of the region, and he was defeated, trying to bring back UNASUR into activity. And also what happened to Petro and on the 25th of April, in which Maduro expected that he would, be blessed and supported on his expectations so that the sanctions are removed. And at the end, it didn't went that way. So I think Maduro has turned toxic. Just see what President Boric recently said regarding Lula's narrative issues. And I think that on their own behalf, and because of migration and other issues, they at the end will understand that it's in their best interest to favor a transition and have free and fair elections next year.
We know that the regime in the past has jailed, exiled, or applied a series of nefarious or underhanded tactics to opposition leaders, to isolate them from their inner circles, to bar them from running, other measures. Do you anticipate the regime will apply some of these same strategies to you if they haven't already begun to do so?
Well, Chris, our team, many members of our team, and myself, we've been object of all kinds of pressure. You are aware that I've been banned from leaving Venezuela for over 10 years. Private commercial airlines are not allowed to sell me a domestic flight ticket. So I need to move around driving my car. And many of my colleagues they had either forced to leave the country. Some have been put in jail for different periods of time. But we certainly understand what they are willing to do, have done to other colleagues in other parties. And we are very cautious about it. We have enforced methods to have filters permanently. But I think the most important element of this is that members of our huge team are all volunteers, people that are here not for resources, not for money, but for passion, and they're truly committed. So there's no money the government could offer or threaten that will break this degree of commitment with the cause.
Maria Corina, before we get into some of the complexities of the election itself, I just wanted to ask you, given the major obstacles outlined already to conducting the election, what has your campaign found to be able to operate in such a highly constrained electoral space?
Look, I mean, it is hard to convey what it means today to fight for freedom in Venezuela. I mean, this regime has demonstrated they are willing to do anything. I mean, they have tortured, they have killed, they have divided families. I mean, they have no limit. But at the end, all these obstacles can be overcome when you have a nation united in a vision, in hope. And if you ask me what is the main element that brings us together today, is this desire to have our families back together, to bring our kids back home. So this has turned not into an electoral political struggle or conquest. This is a spiritual fight between good and evil. And that goes beyond any ideological or political preference. That's why we're seeing today people that are active in the Chavista and even at the PSUV that are coming to us. They are showing, they are appearing publicly in these huge concentrations that you just saw. And these are people that come on their own. Sometimes they have to walk 1, 2, 3 hours under the sun and they wait there. And they are risking their jobs, risking their properties, even risking their lives. So, I mean, we have to understand where this strength comes from. It's so powerful, and therefore why I have such degree of hope in the result that we will see soon.
Before we get to the elections, the opposition is committed to hold primary elections. And some opposition parties favor using the CNE, the National Electoral Body, to organize the primaries. And other parties, including your party, have largely opposed this over concerns of security and the need to include Venezuelans abroad, both issues you mentioned earlier while referring to conditions that needed to be negotiated. How do you see the primaries being organized, and who is funding them if it's not going to be the CNE?
Well, Chris, this is a very important primary, and I'll go back to what I said before. What's the object of the primary? The primary, for me, it's a milestone, a process through which we can build strength and be better prepared to confront and defeat the regime next year. So the primary should be designed and organize in order to achieve that. I think one main issue here is how many people participate, how many Venezuelans participate as voters inside, at home, and abroad. So that's one of the issues that we're permanently telling the Commission of Primaries. Do not listen to what the candidates or the parties are saying or requirements to what the people are demanding. And in order to do that, we need to give trust and confidence that this will be an absolute, honest, and transparent process. Putting such an important event, an outcome, in the hands of the regime, it's absurd. You will give Maduro and his cronies and his guys the possibility to block the process at any point. So that's the main reason why we have insisted that it should be organized by civil society, and that certainly all Venezuelans, home and abroad, should have the right to vote. And let me just add one more thing. What is the end results that we expect in the primary? And that's what makes it so important. And I would say four. First, therefore, we need a process of coordination. I mean, there are many factors that have a legitimate aspiration and ideas, and this would, certainly coordinate in a new leadership that goes much beyond a new candidate, but a new leadership that has to work and fight in order to have elections next year. As I said before, there's nothing said yet. Second, we will build an unprecedented citizen movement and organization inside and abroad that is prepared to fight for our rights. Third, we will be able to build alliances, not only among parties, that's already happening, but with unions, with NGOs, with religious groups, and even speak out to the military and the police force. And finally, to have an unique interlocutor, let's say, a unique person to relate with the international community as a whole. So I believe the primary is very, very important, and we need to care that it is designed correctly.
Maria Corina, you just mentioned bits about the process that are really important for the primary. Let's talk about who votes. I have a question about the Padrón Electoral, or the voter registry, which is out of date by several million voters. And as we discussed already in this event, there are millions of voters who are abroad as well. Can the opposition win with an outdated voter registry? And in the event voters abroad are not able to participate in the election?
That's a very important issue as well, Ryan, because today over 10 million people, Venezuelan people, are disenfranchised. And we're talking roughly 40% of our population. That's huge. We are talking about we have a fourth of our population living abroad, and we estimate that out of the 21 million electors, 4.5 to 5 million live abroad. But also we have people that have been moved without their consent inside Venezuela and make it very hard for them to participate, as well as young Venezuelans that turned 18 years old in the last years and have not been allowed to register. I mean, we're talking about a huge number of Venezuelans. And we need to fight for them to have that possibility to exercise that right. And that's where the primaries come in, jump in as a great opportunity, because if we allow them to vote in the primaries and we have a high turnout around the world, imagine what this would mean. This would put the Venezuelan conflict and its solution once again in the world's agenda as a priority. And it will show the world the willingness of our diaspora, that it's huge, that it's active, to truly get involved into solving their country's drama. So I think that's very important. And one of the issues that I ask you to help us is to facilitate for the Venezuelans abroad to participate all over the world in the primary process.
You mentioned that there's 10 million voters that are currently disenfranchised. I'd like to just ask you a question about how the regime incentivizes its own voters that are not disenfranchised. Can you explain the use of the carnet de la patria, or the national ID card, and for electoral purposes, as well as the government's uno por diez, or 1 by 10 strategy? How are these two things being used to get the government's voters to the polls?
Look, I don't think we have enough time to explain this, Chris. I don't think anyone in Venezuela truly understands how complicated, how profoundly this has gone. I mean, we're talking about around 23 million people that have been forced by one reason and another to get into this huge database called Carnet de la Patria, in which they have put inside all the information regarding your life. If you are affiliated to a political party, if you have any kind of handouts or benefits from the government, if you have voted or not voted, if you have been participating in any initiative from the regime, if you, all the services that people use, such as phone, water, electricity, everything is in there. So at the end, it turns to be a way to intimidate and make people feel that there's this huge big brother following you from when you wake up to when you go to sleep. And they tell you through a network that they're being created, that it's physically in the streets, called UBCs and street chiefs, that they know how you behave. So beyond the true possibilities of they doing that massively, they create this perception, and then they make the Venezuelan people feel that if they don't vote when the regime wants them to vote, or they don't abstain from voting when the regime wants them to do so, they will be punished. And punished means you lose your food stamps, your family doesn't eat that month.
I want to ask a question about the media space. It's something that we've done some work on here at CSIS, and I think it goes without saying that the media space is incredibly closed. The regime has either shut down or taken over most of the media in the country, and the opposition, of course, as you well know, María Corina, is reliant on creative ways to get its message out and non-traditional forms of media. What can we expect from the media ecosystem in 2024, and how can the opposition, in your mind, diffuse its political message? What are some of the creative tactics that it needs to use to get its message out?
Just this morning, I was seeing a report that just came out from EP saying that 166 out of the 335 counties in Venezuela do not have one local media. And that's something I'm living myself, sensing myself, traveling around the country, and it's dramatic. But, Ryan, at the same time, when I visit the most remote, tiny towns and communities, I find people that call me by my name. They are absolutely informed that the primary is coming, and they even repeat some of my messages. And I wonder how people today get informed in Venezuela. And what I'm starting to see is that as of today, Venezuelans have used social media in an extensive and much more than I've seen reported before. And people are organizing physically, as we used to do 100 years ago. Now, thinking in the electoral process and in the presidential election, we certainly need to work on that. And that's one of the issues I think the international community should concentrate on. We need to develop ways through which massively we can inform the Venezuelan people from a fair and free way what's going on and what are our opportunities.
Maria Corina, you said that a freer media space is something that needed to be on the negotiating table in Mexico. And in order for the regime to be willing or incentivized to make concessions in the negotiating table, there needs to be pressure. They need to feel pressure that they need to give something to the opposition to create better conditions. What do you say to the U.S. administration, which has moved in the previous administration from a position of maximum pressure to a posture that favors negotiations in return for sanctions relief? In your opinion, what role do individual sanctions and sectoral sanctions play?
I believe they play a very important role, very important. They are certainly a bargaining tool, and they are a consequence of the behavior of the regime. And this is something that must be stated. These individuals have committed all kinds of horrendous crimes, and they keep on committing them today as we speak. So the reason for these sanctions to be put in place has not improved. On the contrary. So I do think sanctions are needed in a negotiation table. I do not believe Mexico is the effective table where they can be used for many reasons. First and foremost, because Venezuelan people do not feel represented by those that are sitting at that table in our name. And that is one of the reasons that primaries are so urgently needed. We need a legitimate leadership that has the support of Venezuelan people, and that Venezuelan people sitting in the table would mean a credible threat for the regime. As I said before, the regime doesn't have today incentives to see nothing. And they have done nothing. They have given nothing. They have received many things in the previous 15 initiatives of dialogue, but they have given nothing. So I know that 5 months, which is the time that we have from here to the primaries, might seem a long time for many, but I do not think there is a possibility of a successful negotiation before we manage to have that leadership elected.
Maria Corina, I want to ask you a question about misinformation and disinformation coming from the regime, because this is something that's, we've seen it in the last a couple months. First, with the revelation that the regime was using avatars that look pretty real to put up videos on YouTube and other social media sites purporting to report objective information about what's going on in the country, as well as, on occasion, information about the election. And that was followed by a recent report that the regime is in fact using the Carnet de la Patria, which Chris mentioned previously, to pay people to go on social media sites like Twitter and to retweet and repost regime propaganda in a way that catches the algorithm and sort of clogs up the information space on those websites. So what is your party, or what is the opposition in general, doing to counter mis and disinformation from the regime, especially as the regime seems to be upping its game, so to speak, in terms of some of these strategies that it's using?
Well, Chris, we need, Ryan, we need to understand the amount of resources that our regime uses for these kind of purposes. And there's no way we can match that. And at the end, we're working with volunteers, and they have allies and specialists that come from all over the world, Russia, China, and so on. So they have true and real support. This is one of the things that we need to get support from abroad as well, in order to detect and disable them from being put in place. But at the end, to be honest, our true strength is in the real experiences and dynamics that are taking place. And it's so profound and so wide that, to be honest, to me, that's not a major concern.
You just mentioned China, Russia, and I might add to that list Cuba. The regime benefits from ties with foreign authoritarian governments, both within our hemisphere and in other parts of the world. These regimes all have extensive experience with election tampering and with repression, and it's not a stretch to think that they will pull all the stops out to help Maduro win in 2024. So what role do you foresee these regimes will play in helping Maduro, and what can the opposition and perhaps the international community do to prevent some of that?
Well, we've been alerting about this reality for many years, Chris. And at the beginning, most people, international, I think, did not realize the degree of this cooperation. Russia, with Iran, China, and certainly with Cuba. I believe nowadays that Venezuela has turned into a safe haven for these countries, but in the region, but they will not contain in staying and limiting their activities in Venezuela. And we are seeing that already happening with Colombia. So I believe this is one of the reasons and one of the areas in which we certainly need the international community to act. It's not possible to expect that we, the Venezuelan people, on our own can, break some of these relations that go in a wide area of dimension, from intelligence to military activities, from financial to commercial, and many other kinds of activities, as I said. So certainly we need intelligence, and we need information, and we need true action from the Western democratic countries.
Maria Corina, the security forces were mentioned already in our event today. I want to ask a question about them specifically because they are a critical component, as you mentioned, of the regime's repressive apparatus. At the same time, and we've done some work here at CSIS on this as well, they're highly factionalized and fragmented, and they have a multitude of actors and different agendas. Do you believe it's important and necessary for candidates to engage with the military, given their important role in any peaceful democratic transition?
As you say, it is important to understand that Venezuelan, both civil and military forces, have been infiltrated. They are victims of a surveillance of foreign actors, Cuban and Russian, and many of their capabilities have been dismantled. So, and corruption has been one of the ways in which the military has been mostly fractured. Nonetheless, as we've spoken many times, the critical financial distress the regime is going through, you start to see having an effect in the middle and lower ranks of our armed forces. And this is something that anyone that travels around Venezuela can report today. It's my experience is simply appalling to see the level of life, the kind of life our military and our policemen are going through today. We have 18 months, roughly, for this next presidential election, in which we need to develop a comprehensive approach towards this group of individuals in order for them to respect the vote and the sovereign of the Venezuelan people express in the electoral process. And that's our goal. And certainly there are ways to address them. And I think this is the moment in which they are listening the most ever. And, you know, I could mention to you my day-to-day experience when I travel around the country. I mean, when I drive my car or I'm in the co-pilot seat and I reach one of these alcabalas that they put throughout the country, you know, that you have to lower your window and they check checkpoints. And when they recognize me, I mean, the reaction is something that moves my heart. They frequently tell me not to abandon them, that they follow me, that they will protect me. And once in a while, they even say, here comes my commander-in-chief. So they salute. So this is something that they do that, risking their positions, their jobs. It for me is a thermometer of how things are doing within our armed forces and police corps.
It shows that the democratic spirit hasn't been completely crushed from the armed forces, despite the years of indoctrination with the new Bolivarian military ideology. But staying on this security...
And sorry, and one more
Please.
thing, sorry.
Yep.
They are the first witnesses of the obscene corruption of the top ranks. They do see how they live and what they have done. They've seen how our borders are compromised and our territory has given up to the guerrilla, to the narcotics, narco-trafficking groups, to foreign irregular terrorist groups, and even such strategic territory to us, such as Territorio Esequibo, Guyana Esequiba, has been stopped being defended by Chavez and Maduro. This is something that many military consider treason to their mother.
You've almost anticipated my next question, which is...
Sorry?
No, absolutely, it's fine. In the event that there's an opposition victory in 2024, whatever government comes to power will confront a very unstable security environment in the country. As you've mentioned, there's a multiplicity of criminal groups, of actors, of militias, and guerrillas operating in the country. What are the first steps that a new government will have to do to take control, to regain control of Venezuela's territory?
It's important to understand the degree of devastation and destruction this process has put in place. I mean, there's not one single institution standing at this point. Not the judicial system, not Congress, not the military, not even the education or health system. I mean, nothing. Yeah. And as you said, a very important part of our territory, some people believe could reach up to 65% of our territory is under the control of these criminal groups. And certainly we have a very weakened military. So one of the things we need to put in place is through intelligence, and that's where mainly I think we need to invest, and equipment and choosing the best men and women available. And there are. Some have left. I believe many will come back in order to put in place a new and robust military system. We need to totally reconceptualizar for a true free republic in which the military will be absolutely subsidiary to the civil power. I think the moment will be very difficult. We will need international support in order to get technology and to get equipment. But I believe that the incentives are going to be very strong, and we will see many of those that have been feeling captive and political prisoners between these organizations will be freed up and will follow the law and respect our Constitution.
Maria Corina, I'm going to ask the last question in the moderated portion of our event, and then I want to remind viewers that we do have time for Q&A today. So if you want to ask a question, there's still time to do so. You can go to the event webpage, click on the button that says Ask Live Questions. It's a link on the event webpage. Input your question, and it will come to us. So right after this, we'll get to some live questions. But the last question that I want to ask you is, and I don't want to be a downer here, but political parties, they always plan for victory, as they should, rather than defeat. But if we recognize the reality, the opposition has lost in the past in unfree and unfair elections in Venezuela. So what steps should the opposition take in the event of an electoral loss?
Ryan, let me be very clear. If there are free and fair elections in Venezuela in 2024, there are only two outcomes: a landslide victory or an obscene fraud. And in both events, we will be prepared to defend the will of the people of Venezuela.
Very well. Let's go to the Q&A portion.
So, Ryan and Maria Corina, we have our first question from one of our senior affiliates here at CSIS, Antonio de la Cruz, who is asking, the primary election is important to regroup democratic forces. What will you do if it does not happen or does not offer guarantees that it will be free, fair, and verifiable without compromising the identity of voters? And if you do not participate, will you go on to the presidential election in 2024, if you do not participate in a free and fair primary, that is?
Thank you so much, Antonio. We proposed the idea of an election of a new leadership a year and a half ago. At that time, people thought and said that the probabilities of having them were under zero. I would say today, perhaps they're 50-50. Because certainly the regime doesn't want a primary process to take place. And there are certain actors that looks they don't want the primaries as well. They should have the reasons. We certainly want them and want them to be fair and open to all. We still have time to have that done correctly. And I am concentrating all my efforts to those conditions being put in place. So if for any reason the rest of the opposition decides not to go into a primary or to go to some kind of consensus to name someone within them, or the regime blocks the primary in coordination with the sector of the opposition, we'll do what we've said. We're going, as we say in Español, hasta el final. It's until the end. But certainly I am the most interested person in Venezuela that those primaries take place. And I will say very fast why. Because the day after I win the primaries, the first thing I will do is that I would call all the Latin American presidents and presidents all over the world where Venezuelans voted. And I would say, now you have a task regarding 2024. You have to facilitate that these Venezuelans have the chance to vote in those elections. And especially Lula, AMLO, Petro, Boric, that are close to Maduro. Go ahead and make him understand that these people have the right and that you will fight for the right of these Venezuelans that live in your country. Second, I would call the OAS, I would call the United Nations and the European Union to work together into a group of reasonable conditions that should be put in place in order to have a competitive election and have them press for that. Third, I will, as I said before, put in place or keep moving along in the process to have our armed forces do what they should in terms of respect the will of the people in 2024. Four, I would certainly promote and participate in a real negotiation process with strength and legitimacy in order to have these conditions approved. And finally, I would get in touch with all Venezuelan stakeholders. I'm talking about creditors, commercial and financial debtors, potential investors, multilaterals, other governments, and make them understand why it is in their best interest to accompany and support a process that benefits Venezuelan people, certainly, but is also in their own benefit. See that, this is a win-win situation and get everyone involved.
The next question comes from Jose Cardenas, who is a consultant here in Washington. He asks if you can tell us a little bit more about your economic platform to encourage and drive Venezuela's economic recovery.
Thank you very much for the question, Jose. Actually, a few weeks ago, we made public the names of some members of our team. These are individuals that are brilliant economists that have a very long career and reputation. I mentioned some of them: Gustavo Garcia, Rafael de la Cruz, Carlos Blanco, Sari Levy, Henkel Garcia, Hugo Bravo, and we have many others joining our team. And we realize that the task we have in front of us is huge. And we will find a country that is, brutally indebted, that the economy is in ruins. Our currency, nobody is trusted by no one. And we have a moral risk towards our creditors, and we understand, and we have a humanitarian crisis as well as security issues we mentioned before. So this is not like nothing we've seen before. So we required to give trust and credibility to all actors, local and international, Venezuelan citizens, as well as financial and businessmen, in terms of where we're going, and that we know what to do. That we have a plan, and that we have the correct people to put that plan in place. Certainly, we need to go to the IMF and come together into a reasonable plan that in order to go immediately towards the financial creditors and tell them we are willing in an amicable fashion to work in our debt, to restructure our debt, and finally put in place massive and transparent privatization process in which we consider to put in place swaps of debt for equity and other mechanisms through which we can have huge investment in Venezuela and turn our country in a very short term in the energy hub of the Americas, a true and sustainable strategic partner for the U.S. and other Western countries, both in, let's say, hydrocarbon energy and also in renewables, because Venezuela has the potential in both to turn, as I said, into a unique partner. And most of all, in midst of a process of nearshoring that will be, let's say, strengthening in the years to come.
We have another question from Gina Moncada, who did not include her affiliation. She asks a very interesting question. If we witness an electoral scenario similar to the one in 2013 with a very, very narrow win by the Maduro over Capriles, what would you plan to do differently?
Well, I start saying that we are different people. We, the Venezuelan people, we're not the same 10 years ago. We've learned our lessons hard, hurting, really hard, cruel lessons. And I think we have underestimated the regime. And I think we need to prepare to put in place a non-conventional platform. I used to call it a citizen legion, very well aligned, motivated, and instructed in what their task will be. But Gina, you can be sure that it won't be a small difference. It will be a landslide.
So we have another question from Gina, who's asking if you can. You've taken a well-known position on this, but if you can reiterate your position or the position of Ente Venezuela of the CNE participating in the opposition primaries. You got into it, of course, when you responded before, but if you want to reiterate your very well-known position on this.
Well, my point is, it is a critical moment, the whole process. And the regime knows it. And the regime is willing to do anything to stop it or to control it. So we need to get as much people willing to participate as possible. And people do not trust the CNE for good reasons. So I simply find it absurd to put in the hands of the regime the possibility of blocking the process, of deciding when it takes place, if it takes place. So I know it has higher demands in terms of operational requirements and the amount of work that should be put in place. But no one ever thought this was going to be easy. And I think that the Venezuelan people abroad and home, we are willing to do whatever it takes. So that's why what I'm saying is, okay, let's hear what people are demanding. People are saying, we all want to vote. We want to count our votes ourselves. So that's what we are asking, counting the votes. And I think it's something pretty reasonable. Don't you think so?
No, absolutely. And I think to put even finer print on it, Maria Corina, is that there is a past history of Chavismo using some of these votes, in particular in a vote for a recall referendum against Chavez, as a list to enact revenge, right? That the list was actually kept and used later for acts of revenge. And so there's a fear, of course, that if that data is kept, that the anonymity of the vote, the secrecy of the ballot will not be ensured.
And one thing, Ryan, here that I want to say is it's not a technological discussion. Even if you believe that they wouldn't use that information or they wouldn't have access to that information, at the end it's perceptions.
Yep.
And we're talking about a country that has gone through it. They destroyed millions of lives with La Lista Gascon. And that is pretty much present in our soul at this point. There's not one family in Venezuela that hasn't suffered from that. So it is not fair to demand that kind of risk in the Venezuelan people. And it's not me as a candidate, what I'm willing to do or not. That's not the point. It's what we are offering the Venezuelan people at this point.
Maria Corina, thank you very much on behalf of the Americas program here at CSIS. We really want to thank you for joining us today, for sharing your insights, for talking about the upcoming election, and all of us hoping for a democratic outcome in the year ahead, in 2024.
Please, if I may, Ryan, just jumping just for a second. I mean, I know many of the people that are listening to us today are Venezuelans who live abroad. And I want to send a message to them because, I mean, sometimes perhaps they don't realize the value at this moment that those 7 million Venezuelans have for our struggle. I mean, the regime has tried to divide us. And I believe what they have done to the family of Venezuela was something intentional. They realized that you make individuals weaker, more vulnerable if you separate families. And certainly that has brought a lot of grief to all of us. When I go in my house by the rooms of my kids, I have to turn the other way around. and I know this is something I share with every other mom, Venezuelan mom, and also with our kids that are abroad. But there's a lot they can do nowadays. I mean, they need to organize. We need you guys participating in the primaries. We need you guys speaking out. We need you guys telling the world that it's not true that Venezuela is defeated, but that today more than ever, we believe we have the brightest opportunity, that the regime is weak, they are not strong, that the international community has to understand that these are criminals. Maduro is toxic. The International Criminal Court is moving ahead. But most importantly, we're coming together in a shared vision, shared values. And this movement goes beyond political parties and ideas. And this has brought us together because we want to be together again. We want our kids back. And that's, the goal and the strength and the force that move us towards the great victory that we will have next year, 2024.
I think that's a very important message of hope and a call for action for the Venezuelan diaspora. To our audience, our conversation comes at a critical moment when the groundwork for elections is being laid on both sides by the regime, which is seeking to consolidate power and choke off any prospect of a competitive race, and by the opposition, which must marshal resources and unite if it's to stand any chance of delivering a surprise at the ballot box. External pressure remains one of the most potent tools to encourage the Maduro regime to make sorely needed concessions and improve electoral conditions. Shining a spotlight on how and where international pressure can have the greatest impact remains of vital importance. The road to 2024 remains an uncertain one replete with obstacles and hazards which must be navigated. We at CSIS and at the Future of Venezuela initiative will continue to provide a forum for these complex challenges, debates, and questions to be discussed and raise them at the policy level. This concludes our event, and we thank you for joining us today. Feliz tarde.